everyone, and in this tutorial I'm going to show you how to build this simple automatic invoice tracker in Excel. You can use it to record invoices, track payments, see how much is still outstanding, and immediately spot invoices that are overdue. The balance, payment status, days overdue, summary totals, and chart all update automatically. The tracker stays on one tab, so it is useful for freelancers and small businesses without turning into a complicated accounting system. I will build everything from a blank worksheet, including the formulas, conditional formatting, filters, summary card, and the final chart. So let's start with the main invoice table. I will start with an empty workbook. I have just added green as my background color, and I'm leaving space at the top for the title, summary cards, and chart. My table header will be on the row 5, and I'm just using invoice number, client name, invoice date, due date, invoice amount, amount paid, balance due, status, days overdue, and notes as my header. Now I'll just select the names and make it bold. Also, let's resize the columns so that you can read them. Now let's make the column height 30. Now let's make the row height 30 and also row height 30 for the row 3. I'll explain it later. We can also use another color, so in my case green as my header color, and you can't really read black that good on it, so I'll make the font white and also center everything. I will only color the next rows up to rows 31 so that the whole table is visual during this tutorial. However, you can make as many rows as you want. Now I will just add some borders so it kind of looks a bit better and more readable. And I will color format those 3 rows with the gray background color, because I will be having formulas in those columns, so it kind of tells me that I don't need to fill them in. In this invoice number, we can just enter our internal invoice numbers, then client names, invoice date, due date, invoice amount, and amount paid are kind of self-explanatory. So with the balance due, this is where we'll be using our first formula. It is quite simple. What we want to do is we want to see that we do have invoice amount entered. Otherwise, we obviously do not have any balance due if there is no amount due. So we check if the cell F6 is empty or not, because if it is empty, we can leave the balance due empty. And if not, we will use invoice amount minus amount paid. Now let's move to the days overdue formula. And here, what we want to do is we want to obviously, first of all, check again if we do have the invoice amount or not. And if it is empty, then we want to have an empty cell. Next thing to check is that the balance due is greater than 0, because if it is paid, it is no longer overdue, right? And the next thing is we want to check that the due date is less than today, because if it's not, then obviously it's in the future, so it's not overdue yet. And this is it. So technically, even if they paid later, you're not tracking the date paid here. So they might still have paid like overdue, but this is the simple tracker. So if you want to also have the date paid tracked, to have different statuses, just let me know in the comments down below and I'll help you figure it out which formula you need. Now let's just test if the formulas give us the correct result. So today is the 30th of July for me. So the due date is now in the past. Let's say if my invoice amount was 100 and paid is 50, we see that the days overdue is 1, even if it was partially paid, because the balance due is not 0. And even if we have, like, for some reason, bigger amount. The next formula is status. So for that, obviously we check if we have invoice amount or not. And if we don't have it, then we just have an empty cell. I will be using only 4 statuses. So the first status is the easiest one. If our H6, which is our balance due, is less or equal to 0, so basically if we were overpaid for some reason, or if we are even, then it is paid, right?
The next status is the most important status to us. It is overdue. Because we are using this kind of chain reaction if statements, in every next step, we already know that all of the previous steps were negated. So if we ended up here, we already know that F6 is not empty and H6 is positive. So they do owe us money. So for an overdue, we only now need to check if the due date is in the past or not. So if E6 is less than today or not, then it is overdue. The next status is the one that I like to test. But if you don't need it, you can just type in open and close the brackets and leave. However, I like to see if I have some partially paid invoices. However, I do not care if they are partially paid or not, if they are overdue. I only want to see the partially paid if the due date is in the future. So in this case, in this step, I know F6 is not empty. H6 is positive. They still owe us money, but the due date is obviously in the future or today, because otherwise we wouldn't have ended up in this step. So what I need to test is G6 greater than 0, which would mean that they did pay us something, but they still owe us money. The due date is in the future, and there was some invoice amount. So here I can type partially paid, and now I can close the whole chain statement thing with open and just close all of the brackets. Why I can do it? Because for open, I now know that they didn't pay anything. The invoice amount was stated, the due date is in the future, and the balance due is obviously positive, so they do owe us money. Now I can just check if my status works or not. The invoice amount is 100, so if they paid 50, it is overdue. If they didn't pay anything, it's also overdue. If they pay 100, then it is paid. If they paid more than 100, it is still paid. You can maybe add like overpaid or error or something like that. I will now test that if the due date is in the future, what will happen? If I delete the value, it is open like I wanted. And if I enter 50, it's partially paid. So I might investigate what happened here, why it's not paid in full. Now let's work on this header. I will just merge all of those rows and columns just to enter my title, which is invoice tracker. And then you can just copy paste the 3 columns from before. I'll just made it in caps. Invoice amount, amount paid, and balance due. And the goal is to obviously just sum up the whole column. Let's use the same green color, white font, bold. And I think we should resize all of the columns. Let's maybe use column width 20. For the title, I'll just make the font a bit bigger, and obviously let's make it white. Now I will add the borders to it, as I always do. Let's use this gray font that kind of tells me that I have some formulas in them, and we will make the font this green color and bold. Also maybe a bit bigger. Let's go with 13. And like I said, this one is the easiest. We just use the sum, and then we can just highlight the whole column. And we then can just extend the formula because all of them will just be summing up the whole column. And we can use this dollar formatting, and I forgot to center the headers. So for needs attention, we will need a formula. So for needs attention, we will be just using the COUNTIF formula. For that, just type in COUNTIF, then highlight the whole column with status, And we will be just counting how many overdue values we have in them. Now I will just test it out, right? And it changed to 1. Now let's just format things. So obviously invoice date and due date, I like when it is in short date format. And for invoice amount, amount paid, balance due, we do need the $ formatting. Now let's start working on our color formatting. So for each status, it would be super easy. I think for open, we can just leave it gray because it's just open, it's nothing. However, for the rest of them, we will be checking if I6 is equal to, and then just type in the status. If you're using any other status, just type in the name and then hit the format and fill and then pick a color. So now I'm doing it for paid, and this is obviously something good, so I'm just using the green coloring. Then I'm doing exactly the same thing. The status column is still highlighted. You could have also chosen the manage formulas and then just duplicated it and just changing the paid to partially paid, and then you would have needed to change green to yellow. And the last status is overdue, exactly the same. We need to check if I6 is paid or not, and then I obviously want to have a red color as my fill color.
I also think that it might help if we highlight the whole row if we have an overdue status. So for that, I highlight the whole table, and I will use the same formula. However, I do need to fix my I column. Otherwise, the formula will shift as Excel does. For that, I use the $ before my I, and that's it. If $ I6 is overdue, I want to have this red color. However, if I were to color the whole row, it might be very overpowering. So what I like to do is I just change RGB to this, and then I make it just less red. So the saturation lower. And now you can see that it has this muted red color as my fill color. And for some reason, the status disappeared. So I just go to the manage formulas and the whole workbook formulas, and I just need to move this red status above my overall status, and now I have both of them visible. The next color formatting would be for our days overdue. What we can do is we can use 2 colors. If the overdue is, for example, less than 30 days, for example, if our days overdue is greater than 0, so we do have overdue, we use the yellow color formatting. So we kind of say, hey, it's just 2 days. It needs attention, but nothing too critical. However, if our overdue is more than, in my case, 29 days, so everything 30 days and up, then I want to color it red. So I use the same formula, but instead of greater than 0, I use greater than 29, and I change yellow to red. You can use any other number, obviously. So some of you have like 14 days deadline, maybe use the 14, or I don't know, maybe 2 months if you're not that critical, or maybe 1 day and 2 days, I don't know. The next color formatting that we will add is for the due date. We already know that it is going to be red if it's overdue. However, maybe we want to keep in mind the not fully paid invoice numbers that are in the next 7 days. So we will use the AND formula for it. First thing is that our balance due, which is H6, has to be positive. Otherwise, they have paid and we do not care that it is in the next 7 days, right? So we check if H6 is greater than 0. And our due date obviously has to be greater than today. Otherwise, it would have been overdue. And less than today plus 7. So in the next 7 days. You can also customize it. You can have plus 14, plus 2, plus 3, whatever works for you. I'm just using 7 as an example. And we also need to add the yellow background color or any color that you like or need. Now let's test it out. As I said, and as you can see, today is the 30th of July. So if I enter 7/31, it's going to be tomorrow. So the due date is in the future. And my balance is $50, so it's going to get highlighted with yellow. Now we can see that I have obviously made some errors with my days overdue formula, because why is it red? And the thing with this is that my days overdue has formulas in it. So technically for Excel, it kind of tries to see if it is greater than 29. So what we will do is we will use the AND formula, and we will be checking that it is greater than 29 and that it is not empty. And as soon as I do that, you see that it's now yellow, because I also need to repeat it for my greater than 0 formula. So it should be AND greater than 0 and not empty. The last thing that you might want to add is the color formatting for the amount paid. What I want to do is to see if by any chance the amount paid is greater than the invoice amount. Maybe I got some tips, maybe it was a tip error, but I just think that we need to track that too. So for that, I will be highlighting the amount paid column and using the AND formula again. So for that, we need to obviously track 2 conditions. First of all, that our F6, which is invoice amount, is not empty, because if it is empty, we obviously can't say anything. And that our H6, which is our balance due, is less than 0, which is then negative balance due, which would mean that the amount paid that was subtracted for the invoice amount was greater. And I want to have this red background color. So if I were to test it, so they own us $100, and for some reason they gave us $500, I get this red background color. Another thing that you can use this formula for is, for example, if you have like 50% deposit, you can color red everything that was paid that is, for example, less than 50% of the invoice amount. The only thing that is missing is the chart. I'm using this bar chart, and then here stacked bar, the right one. And this is just the formatting that I like. You don't need to even use the bar chart if you don't like it. You don't need to use my formatting. I normally just delete everything because I like to add the data labels. I don't want to be trying to subtract each value. So what I do is I move the legend to the right, and then I add the data labels inside, and I will just change the color and font. Now I can color the amount paid in this green color and the amount, the balance due, in the red color. And I also don't need the background color. I want the bar chart to be kind of floating around, so that I go to Format and pick No Fill, No Borders, and just resize it a bit. And that is the finished automatic invoice tracker. I will just add some sample data so that we can see that all of the formulas work. You can now enter each invoice, record payment, see the remaining balance, and immediately identify anything that is open, partially paid, or overdue. The tracker stays simple enough for everyday use, but it still includes the automation that makes it more useful than a basic invoice list. You can download the finished Excel and Google Sheets template using the link in the description. If this tutorial was helpful, please like the video and subscribe for more practical spreadsheet tutorials. And if you have another tutorial for me in mind, just let me know down below too. Other than that, have a great day. Goodbye.